This is our 6 o'clock presentation of Evansville History 101. Mary will be repeating her program as soon as we've completed with our history lesson, so you won't miss anything out if you only came in and heard part of Mary's presentation. I'm John Decker. I'm president of the Evansville Grove Society, our local historical society. I'm also on the board here at Creekside Place, so I welcome you here in that capacity as well. We're going to have a quick trip through Evansville history, and we're going to talk about Evansville's architecture as well. That's something that certainly put us on the map. As I mentioned, I'm president of the Grove Society, and I'd like to run through some educational resources for you right off the bat. Since obviously you're interested in Evansville history, here's where you can learn more. Starting at the Grove Society's museum complex at the entrance to Lake Leonard Park. We also have a website, www.grovesociety.org. Quite a bit of information there, and we are very active on Facebook, and I suspect that's one reason we have such a turnout tonight. I put this up immediately because the Wisconsin Historical Society is substantially improving and revamping its website. And I selected this screenshot from the new website to highlight the historical property information they now have. You can do a very sophisticated advanced search to find out about historic properties all across the state. If you search for Evansville, you will find 502 resources on that website, including records about historic properties, stories about Evansville, historical photographs, and the like. One you will find is this one. I imagine there are some folks here who remember when the Baker office building looked like that, when it was a tire warehouse for the cooperative. Looks a little bit different now. Another resource is the Eager Free Public Library. There's an outstanding local history room on the lower level. It's the windows on the right-hand side of the building. Excellent archives available there, and the library building is very historic. It was the first building to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places in Evansville, listed individually in 1976. And bear three things in mind about the library. It was completed in 1908. It was designed by famous Wisconsin architects, the firm of Claude and Stark in Madison, and it is a prairie-style building. Hold that in your brains for a while. The library has an excellent website. It's a portal to all kinds of information, most notably to newspaper articles archived worldwide, going very far back in history, and they are searchable. Ruth Ann Montgomery has been our outstanding local historian. She's got a fabulous website. If you were just to do a Google search, Evansville, Wisconsin history, this page, I guarantee you, would come up first. And I'm showing you here maybe 20% of her home page. Tremendous amount of material here that she has researched and collected for decades. Here is the City of Evansville official website. That's also a treasure trove of information. It's got a virtual walking tour of the historic district. Click on for visitors and navigate around in the history area, and you'll be amazed at all of the information that is contained there. Also note the Smart Growth tab on the lower left corner. Click on that and you'll get the Smart Growth Comprehensive Plan, which has information on Evansville demographics, employment, land use patterns, history, and it even has a section on geography and geology of the area. We've been talking about the Johnstown Moraine, important feature for the Ice Age Trail, marking the greatest extent of the last glaciation. It's labeled as moraine high relief at the top of the map, and that's the Johnstown Moraine. Now this is an old textbook from 1964, and there's better updated information available, but this is a pretty good overall picture. That's a map of Rock County, all 20 of the townships, with Union Township being in the top left corner. Each township is 6 miles square, 6 miles across, 6 miles up and down. Speaking of the Johnstown Moraine, a good place to get a view of it is at the Evansville Golf Course. You can really appreciate the topography of the moraine up there. Butch Beatles kids often ask, gee, what was Evansville like before settlement? Here is the first map of Evansville. Its area is there, but there's not been any development yet. Wisconsin was first surveyed in the early 1830s. This was all government land, and before it could be conveyed to private individuals, it had to be surveyed. This is a portion of the survey of the town of Union. There are only 2 man-made improvements shown in this plan of survey. There's a trail across the top portion of the map that is the Sugar Creek to Catfish Creek Trail. And then down in section number 21, there's a branch of Allen's Creek, and there's a little black mark and some writing that you probably can't make out, but that says Mitchell's Trading Post. That is the first building or structure in the Evansville vicinity, obviously built in the 1830s. It's land that is now owned by Kent and Mary Libby, but there is no evidence whatsoever left of the trading post out there. Evansville developed in section 27, 26, and 28. One of the teaser questions I posed on Facebook is, why is the intersection of Main Street and Madison Street known as the Four Corners? And if you don't know the answer to that, we'll find out in a moment. Here's the 1858 map of Evansville. The town was platted in 1855. And already we can see that the settlement pattern is well established. We've got Main Street running through the middle. We've got Railroad Street. Actually, that is now Maple Street. But that's the only street on the map that has had its name changed. None of those locations have changed. We've got Main, Church, Liberty, Madison, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Streets. The B&M Railroad, showed by a dashed line on the right-hand side, that was just a conjectural location. The railroad wasn't located actually until 5 years later, and when it came through, it was on the east side of Allen's Creek. Here's the 1891 plant map. Now our settlement is very well established. We can see what is now Highway 14 angling off to the southeast through section 26 and 25. Union Street is well established, Highway 14 north running through section 22. In the lower left-hand corner of the map, angling off to the southwest, is Old Highway 92. And the railroad lines are intact. Here is a recent aerial photo of Evansville. The Mitchell Trading Post was about where that red dot is labeled 162, although that has no reference at all to the trading post. It's there for other purposes. The section lines appear in light red, and notice that section 27 appears right smack dab in the middle of the downtown at the Four Corners. Now, the reason we call that the Four Corners, and the reason it's located there, is when the surveys were done, the surveyors plotted the section corners, but also the quarter section corners. And that is because the land was typically conveyed by quarter section, 160 acres, or quarter section, 40 acres. And it happens that the four different quarter sections were conveyed to different owners at different times, but the four quarters all touched at the Four Corners. So Main Street was built east and west on the quarter section line, running as a town line, and Madison Street was built north-south on that other quarter section line. South 4th Street runs here, and Cemetery Road runs there. So for those of you who like walking a particular distance, 4th Street is 1 mile west of Cemetery Road. So if you want to walk 2 miles, start at any point on Main Street, walk out to Cemetery Road, turn around, walk west to 4th Street, go back to your point of beginning on Main Street, and you'll walk 2 miles. And you can thank the surveyors who went out and did that work 170 years ago for your walking enjoyment. But that's where we get the Four Corners. The first land sold in the Evansville area. I've got a copy of the original government patent here. It was sold in 1837 to a John Steenbergen of Shenandoah County, Virginia, and to George Allen of LaForte County, Indiana. Allen's Creek is named for that Allen. He probably got out to Evansville once to look around, otherwise he was a land speculator. The last parcel in section 27 to be sold was the northwest quarter. And we'll talk about the famous purchaser of that land because the northwest quarter is where Lake Leota Park is located. Here is that famous individual from early Wisconsin history. Anybody recognize him right off the bat? No. He was a French-Canadian, born at an uncertain date in Montreal, moved to Milwaukee in 1818 as a clerk for the fellow running the John Jacob Astor fur trading post in Milwaukee. He married one of the boss's daughters and ended up taking over the agency. When he got here, he didn't speak English, but he learned English. He was naturalized as an American citizen, and he became the first mayor of Milwaukee. His name is Solomon Juneau. So he was the first purchaser in 1846 of that northwest quarter. And we're going to talk about some people famous in Evansville history. They weren't famous when they arrived here, but after they graduated from the Evansville Seminary, they sure were. The seminary was started in 1855. The architect on the project was a local lad by the name of James West. He did the architectural work and the supervision of construction as a teenager, and he used the bricks made by his father, Jacob West. Here is the first famous graduate of the Evansville Seminary, Robert M. LaFollette, Sr., Fighting Bob LaFollette. He went on to the University of Wisconsin after graduating from the seminary, became Dane County DA, got elected to Congress, was elected governor, And before they had direct election of senators, the Wisconsin legislature elected him to the U.S. Senate, where he served until his death in 1927. Historians rate him among the 5 most effective, most influential, best members of the U.S. Senate ever. He was a progressive. He ran for president in 1904, carried Wisconsin and 17% of the popular vote nationwide. So he is, hands down, the most influential, effective Wisconsin political figure. His friend and classmate was Charles Van Nuys. If you're familiar with the UW campus, you know that Van Nuys Hall is the highest building on campus, headquarters of the Board of Regents, named in his honor. He was a world-famous geologist and probably the best ever president of the University of Wisconsin. He was the one who, with Phlalic, developed the Wisconsin idea, which is the resources of the university would be used for all of the people and would be applied to improve government. Burr Jones, another contemporary and a graduate of the school. You probably remember from entering Lake Leota Park that there's reference to Burr Jones' athletic fields, the Ball Diamonds. They're named for him. There's a Burr Jones Park in Madison. On the east side, it's on East Washington near First Street. Also an athletic facility in recognition of the fact Burr Jones was a very good baseball player. He was also a very good lawyer. He served one term in Congress right before Phlalic. He served on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and most famously, he served as a professor at the UW Law School, taught evidence, wrote this book, Jones on Evidence, which became nationally famous, used by law schools throughout the country. Person Denise, thanks for the donation of the volume. This book put the Evansville boy nationally on the map. Speaking of ball players, here's Cal Broughton. He was the first major league player from Evansville, played on a number of professional teams in the 1880s and 1890s as a catcher. He also pitched for a couple of teams. When his major league days were over, he came back here to Evansville, where he became the first police chief of the city of Evansville, a post that he held for 17 years. Now we all know, I think, about Theodore Ride, internationally the most famous graduate of the Evansville Seminary. His family moved here onto West Main Street. The house is still standing. Tom and Mary Beaver own it. And they're very proud of the heritage of the house. He's buried in Maple Hill Cemetery. But after graduating here, he went down to Chicago, to New York City, over to France for really the high point of his career when he lived with Claude Monet and his family. And he painted a number of French landscapes, including the one on the easel behind him that doesn't look very impressive in black and white. But you put it in color, and you see what a remarkable piece it is. That it's entitled The Valley of the Seine in France. In recognition of our art heritage, we have a plein air competition. Artists from around the region come here in June, paint outdoors, and then their paintings are exhibited and sold. Last year there were some just phenomenal paintings done. But we can't limit this just to the men. This is Vi Campbell. She lived out east, a little ways out of town, where Kim Veely has her home and law, used to have her law office. She was very much involved nationally in the temperance movement and the women's suffrage movement. Those went on simultaneously. She started working on those causes in the mid-1880s, and she and her cohorts finally succeeded in getting national prohibition in 1919, and the woman's right to vote in 1920. So those outcomes were due in large part to this Evansville woman. I put out another teaser on Facebook about what famous Civil War figure on the Confederate side once lived in Evansville. Does the picture help you? Does the name Belle Boyd help? The Mata Hari of the Confederacy. She was a notorious Confederate spy, did a lot of work for Stonewall Jackson. After the war, she went on the lecture circuit to make an income and came around the northern states, typically to posts of the Grand Army of the Republic, to give lectures about her experience as a Confederate spy. She rented an apartment in Evansville in 1900. It was above the old Evansville Review offices. It's now Wayne Wilson's law office. The apartment upstairs was hers, and she traveled to northern Illinois and central Wisconsin posts to put on her program. A number of history books erroneously say that Belle Boyd died in Evansville. She didn't. She died in what was then called Kilbourne City, now Wisconsin Dells. She's buried up there, and if you're interested, I can tell you how to find her grave that is elaborately maintained by the Daughters of the Confederacy. We have one city park in the Evansville Historic District. Many people don't know about it. It's a 2-acre park to the north and east of the Evansville Seminary / Weiler School buildings. And a proposal from a citizen group has just come forward to develop a peace garden. If you're not familiar with these, go online and search peace gardens, and you'll be very impressed with the tranquility of these places. This peace garden was just proposed last week, approved by the Evansville Historic Preservation Commission, and submitted to the State Historic Preservation Officer, Madison, for approval. Leonard Lake Leota Park is a big draw for Evansville, but until September of last year, it was not listed on the National Register. It was not part of the original Evansville Historic District, but I have here the certificate attesting to its listing on the National Register in its own right as a historic site and designed landscape. This is what we call the upper park. It's the original portion of the park, formerly called Leonard Park because Levi Leonard, our first school teacher and an early pioneer, sold the land to the city for park purposes. Some people think we don't have a bandstand in the park, but they're wrong. Take a look at the caption on the postcard. Bandstand and warming house. This is one of the structures built in the 1930s as part of the Reconstruction, recovery, and employment operations conducted then. And there are many more rustic stone improvements in the park, as you know, including the water steps there and the creek walls. They actually weren't built by the CCC, but they were built by a host of other federal agencies and programs during the Great Depression, including the Works Projects Administration. This is a relic from those days. The idea was to provide federal funding and to provide local materials and local labor to use it in a labor-intensive fashion to get these out-of-work people work and compensation. So this work was all done by local Evansville people, using local Evansville materials, which we carry on today in the restoration of the creek walls, using local materials and local labor. The rustic stone buildings like the bell tower are typical. Evansville's first school bell is housed there, and you'll notice the address up on top, 20 Antes Drive. The road through the lower park is named Antes Drive in recognition of Robert Antes, local, well, he was our local equivalent, I think, of Teddy Roosevelt. Great outdoorsman, active politically, and throughout the Depression, he was able to get one program after another here into Evansville to employ men. In addition to the bell tower, the fellows built fireplaces, tables, chairs, and duck houses out of stone. And we keep improving the park. It's not just an unchanging historic relic. This handicapped accessible pier was just built at the best fishing spot in the lake. And this coming summer, there's going to be a further improvement. Lake Leota Park is a place for active outdoor recreation. Basketball, baseball, softball, playgrounds, tennis, skateboard park. And next year, you know what this is going to be? This is going to be the disc golf course. Another citizen group came forward with this idea and got approval from the Historic Preservation Commission and the State Historic Preservation Officer. It'll be built this coming summer. And what do you think of the water hazards on hole 9? Now we get to the Civilian Conservation Corps. Are you familiar with this monument out on Fair Street at the school community forest? Reads Campsite, Veterans Company 1680, CCC 1933. The CCC men themselves built this monument. And the plaque on the top tells us that the trees there grew from seeds that were gathered on the Gettysburg battlefield. Here's a publication that the CCC put out about Evansville's particular company that served here from July to November 1933. And you think the federal government can't act quickly when it wants to? The legislation authorizing the CCC was introduced in March of 1933. It's as early as Congress could assemble back in those days. The guys from Evansville, who came to Evansville from elsewhere, were recruited, uniformed, equipped, trained, and moved here to Evansville by July, 4 months after the bill was introduced. It's called a veteran company, has the V designation, because these men, unlike most CCC workers, who typically were young men, 17, 18, 19, didn't have jobs, they came from the big cities and they wanted to get out and do something healthy. These fellows were all military veterans, mostly World War I veterans, who had